I'm Diane Babbitt. I'm probably one of the oldest people living here now in the neighborhood, and I'm going to be 91 in December, so that gives you a clue to my memory. And I'm not sure that I'm one of the original people that settled here, but pretty close to it. When we first came, we were finishing college and teaching in Western Mass, and we're local. We're from Cape Cod, from Hyannis area, and we saw this house. We were living up on Point of Pines in a rented cottage, and we would walk the children, who were infants then, down around the neighborhood with a big dog that we owned. And this house sat here, and it sat for a year, not bought. And so finally, when my husband said, I have a job back on the Cape and I want to go home, I said, fine, let's go. And I have the house we're going to buy. And he hasn't gotten over it ever, because we never looked at another house. This was the perfect neighborhood. It was on the pond, and it seemed ideal for bringing up two children. We bought the house in July of '93, and we have been here ever since. And so, sorry, not 93, 63. And we've been here ever since, and we thought it was the perfect house because it was just right for two small children with a knee-deep pond in the backyard. And then as they grew up, we added a bunk bed and a few other accommodations, and everybody then went on their own way, so it worked out fine. My husband, of course, in the meantime has died, and so I'm here now with my daughter nearby. And so the original neighborhood was pretty much settled by Mr. Nathan Bresner, which is evidence with the lane, Nathan Lane and Bresner Street. And he didn't own all of the lots. Some were privately owned, as was this house. This house was owned by a young carpenter in Plymouth, and he built it on conjecture that he would eventually sell it, and he did eventually sell it. But some of the names came from the original Mr. Bresner. It's been an interesting neighborhood because, as you know, we have the deeded beach rights, which is a real boon to everyone. And the beach has been just wonderful for families and for individuals also. It has changed a little bit as the neighborhood has changed and people have come in with new ideas from where they lived. Some have worked and some have not. But basically, it is the same beach. It was a beach with a lot of scrub pines and a lot of grass that grew, and then the sandy beach. And people really, really took advantage of it in those days and enjoyed it. And you'd see lots of families down there. When we had the annual meeting, we would have a picnic, and everybody contributed. There was no buying of food or cooking or barbecuing. Everybody brought a dish. They were assigned to bring a dish, and they would bring a dish. And it was cold meats and cold salads and that kind of thing. It was very neighborly. I think as time went on, some of the residents who were here became somewhat famous in their own right in this locale and maybe in the state also. One was Vernon Coleman, who lived where the Arnfelds now live. They tore his house down and rebuilt a new house. He was a famous marine oil painter, and many of his paintings hang in the town hall of Barnstable. And he was quite well known for his marine art, and he also taught at the local high school. Later, his son bought a house somewhere up near where you live. I think the Dreys live in it now. That's who lives in that house. And that was his son, and he was a radio engineer for WBZ, and he would commute to Boston and back to his work. Another famous local artist was Herb Sunderman, who lives where Demas and his wife live, and that's close to me. And he had 3 children living there, 3 girls, which he brought up, and his wife. And he was a marine artist also, but also an artist generally of all kinds of paintings. And he taught at the high school also. and, was quite good at it. And so we've had some famous people. One of the interesting things, I think, is the house on this pond that was owned by a Mr. and Mrs. Patberg still has a painting of Vernon Coleman's in their kitchen, I believe, which has now been covered over by another owner. And I think they don't realize what they have in their house, but they prefer to do that, so that's fine. The house at the end of that drive at the point was owned by a Crosby. And Mr. Crosby, originally, he was connected with the Crosby Boatyard people, and he lived there. So we've had some interesting neighbors come and go, and I'm sure there have been others. There have been some professors who have lived up at the other end of the neighborhood on Bresner that have retired here. So we've had a mixture of families and professional people and semi-professional, and it's made for a perfect neighborhood. It really has. We were always grateful that we had such a good neighborhood because we had people who always looked out for each other and took care of everybody in the neighborhood. And what's very interesting to me is that now second generation children are coming back and buying homes in the neighborhood. My daughter will have this house, and my son, Lauren O'Neill, and I can't think of her married name now, but she just bought a house beyond you. She lived up on the hill where Nancy Bettinelli lives now, and their young family, and she said she couldn't wait for a chance for a house to be for sale so she could come back to the neighborhood. Dr. Smith and his wife were some of the original people here. They had a family of 8 children, and one of them now has come back and bought the family home, or is in possession of the family home, and they're all going to share it together, which is nice. So we have things like that happening. I believe Mrs. Anderson's daughter lives with her home there. They've made an apartment in the lower level of her home, so she's living there. And it's very nice to see that happen. It means that the neighborhood is a viable, well neighborhood that people want to come back to and want to keep going. We do have some neighbors that are new that have moved in, and like every neighborhood, people bring ideas from where they came, and we've had all kinds of weird ideas for the beach, as most everyone knows. But hopefully common sense has prevailed, and we're able to keep the beach as a beach with some improvements. The tables are nice, and the kayak racks and that kind of thing have made a big addition. And of course the town has put in the requirement for mooring for other boats out beyond the swimming area. The beach in my day, my early day with my young children, did not have any roped off area, did not have any problems with geese or anything like that. That seemed to have come along during a later time. There was a lady who lived up here on Laurel that Kay Licton, an English lady who lived by herself, and she took it upon herself to go up and put ropes across every night. And she was a small little English lady, and she would drag a rope across to keep the geese off the beach so the children wouldn't have to have that to contend with. I think that generally the beach has been maintained in the spirit that it was meant to be, and that it is for the residents who live here, who buy here. Even though they have deeded beach rights, the Beach Association has been formed for the betterment of the beach and for the protection of the beach. My husband was one of the early directors of the beach, and now my daughter is serving in a capacity that I did, which was a recording secretary of the beach. And so it's been interesting, this turnover, this constant renewal of what happens in a neighborhood, because you don't find that much anymore. You find a diversity in neighborhoods, but people seem to go their own ways. They have their own agendas. And here it's more cohesive, I think, which is nice. We used to have a lovely sign at the beginning up here on Pond Street, and I don't recall if there was one at the other end on Bresner or not, but it was a beautiful sign that named this as Wequacket Estates. And somehow it got lost, it got taken down. I don't really know how or why. And I would hope maybe that would reappear someday. just as a designation of the neighborhood, because it is a neighborhood. And I think that would be important to all of us who live here and people who just drive by and come in and look. As you know, we get lots of diverted traffic when they have road work and so forth. And so people have come to know the neighborhood. And that's, one of the reasons why I think it would be nice to have that sign back up there, just to give it its name back and designate it, just as they have done down on Finney's Lane near the police station, where they put up a designated sign for a particular neighborhood there. And it's the same idea. Or the Heights, the Wequacket Heights also has done the same thing. So maybe that'll be a reality someday. The beach itself seems to be thriving. I don't see, other than the addition of kayaks and some small boats, a great deal of change, which is nice. And neighbors have been accommodating who abut the beach and have not put up an awful lot of fuss when we kind of encroach a little bit with ideas next to their property line. But they've been very generous, and everybody wants to make it as pleasant for everyone as possible. Yes, I did teach some lessons up there. That was part of my career. It was aquatics. It was a big thing in my career. I was a physical education teacher, and then after that, I became a professor at Springfield College, and aquatics was a very big part of that role also. So I did teach some lessons. I used to swim from my area here off the beach over to Holly Point and back, and no one in those days ever worried about the cleanliness of the lake. It was always clear, it's always been tested, and no one has ever become ill because of it. There are some problems in some of the other inlets across the lake, but really nothing that has disturbed the health of anybody that I have heard of anyway. Right, well, that would be my kids' generation, and there were a lot of the kids, the O'Neills, which Lauren has now returned and bought a home. There were a lot more kids there, and we had kids at both bus stops, Pond Street and up at Bresner when they come in, were there. And it was very interesting because they all grew up together and they all got along, and they'd play out here across from Mrs. Sweeney. The gang would come and meet, and they'd play kick the can and things like that. And they were happy with that. They didn't need a lot of extra things. They would go up to the beach with a towel, that's all. They didn't need a trampoline or a slide or any of those things to have a good time. They could make a good time by themselves. They could build sandcastles if they wanted to. There were just a lot more children that lived here in the families. And then there were a lot of retired people, such as I am now, but they were here. And next door to me, where the LaRues now live, were two maiden sisters. And across the street from me was an elderly couple that were exceedingly nice and welcomed the children. To give you an example, I would make my children get up on May Day and hang May baskets. And they would go at 6:30 in the morning and drop the May basket on the doorstep and ring the bell. And it wasn't until years later that Mrs. Adamson informed me that they didn't get up at that hour. So it was a lesson for both of us to learn, and that is, we thought everybody was up at 6:30, and the people that were retired were not up at 6:30, but we didn't think about it at that time. Mrs. Sweeney had children here. Her home was originally owned by three sisters of the family, and she was the niece, and the home came to her. But she had three children also, two sons and a daughter. And they were part of that whole group that were here and joined in the kick the can or the hide and seek throughout the neighborhood. All of those old time games that kids seem to have forgotten about now. There are a lot more animals along with the children in the neighborhood now. Many of us have small pets, and so it's nice to see that happening too. Because in those days, I don't think there were very many animals that I recall. We owned a large economy-sized boxer, but other than that, I think there might have been 3 or 4 that I can think of that had cats or dogs, and that, kind of limited the animal population a little bit. Mr. Bresner sold a great many of his lots to relatives, the Snyders, the Epsteins, and the Bermans, Schumann, Mrs. Schumann. Those houses, some are occupied by members of the family now, but others have been transferred to other people. And so it's interesting that that also occurred because a lot of his relatives bought, in, I guess, in retrospect, what they would call a summer home. And then some ended up moving here permanently and living here for a good deal of the time as they retired. So it was interesting. The houses that you see here where my house is were pretty much here. Out through the neighborhood, there were a house and maybe a space, and then another house or two houses and a space. It was slowly being developed and built, and ultimately, I think now all the lots are sold as far as I know. This one lot across the street on Pond Street from me is an unbuildable lot and belongs to the family that own the house there now, Paul and Donna. And I think it's Mr. Adamson, who was the prior owner and original owner, had it declared an unbuildable lot by the town. So I think there's not a great deal that they can do with it other than what they are doing now currently. But it was a slow development of a neighborhood. But I think in the beginning, most of the growth was up toward the Point of Pines area, where Mr. Bresner had a lot of relatives who wanted to be up closer to the lake itself rather than away from the water. I would like to see the beach, I think, continue pretty much as it is and not try to bring in, not that the ideas are not good, they are, but sometimes they're not good for that particular place. And I would like to see it remain as it is now, a community beach where there's a get-together once or twice a year with all your neighbors and discuss what's needed as far as the beach goes for use and safety, but not try to change it into a playground, which has been suggested in the past. It isn't meant to be that. It's meant to be just a place to go and sit in the sun and the sand and enjoy the water, and then launch a boat if you want to, a small boat, off of that edge outside of the swimming area. As far as the neighborhood goes, I'd like to see perhaps, we had one gathering where we had people come that did not necessarily belong to the beach association, but had the deeded rights by their deed to come to the beach. We had one gathering once. I'd like to see that happen more than one time during the summer, where the neighborhood could get together, because now, at my age, I don't go through the neighborhood as much as I used to. I don't know all of the people, and I think it would be nice. It's not that big a neighborhood. We should know each other. And I think it would be nice if we had a social event maybe twice a year up at the beach. And at that time, the one that we had was organized by my daughter Maria Kehoe, basically. And people were asked to bring some kind of a snack of some kind. It was more like a social gathering, not the annual meeting. Just sit down and chat with each other and get to know different people that have moved into the neighborhood. And we don't seem to do that. And I think it would be nice if we could be more cohesive along those lines and have people come and do that maybe twice a year, in the beginning and maybe at the end, rather than at the beach meeting when we're dealing with problems pertaining to the beach itself. I think there's more outside of the beach. The beach is the thing, I think the beach is the glue that holds this neighborhood together. It really is. And people who don't live here frequently speak of it as, oh, you're so lucky you have a beach in your neighborhood. And we are lucky, and I think we don't realize it.